Welcome back. Here's where you left off.
Politics in books. Do they express the writer's attitudes or cultural in hand? ? This has always been a very interesting topic because when we're trying to figure out what to talk, this actually came. This is Derek's question to me at one point. Do politics get into books, or the political state in the world goes into a book, depending on the writer's location or attitude? And the question's always been bothering both of us, or not bothering, more like questioning. So the question I have for Derek is, do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I think it really comes down to, as we were discussing it, really comes down to what is the purpose of the politics in the book. If there's an undertone of somebody's attitude, or we don't want to get into too many specifics. If you have like a political party and you're talking about that party, and that party is part of the storyline of your book, and you're including that, I don't necessarily consider that as directly including politics in your book, as it's part of the narrative of the book. But if the narrative of your book is about politics, then yes, politics are the whole focus of the book. And I think it's a thin line between those two things, where in this day and age, when there's a lot of political rhetoric and so forth, that people use books sometimes as means of political, we can go even as far as to say propaganda or ideology, or versus somebody trying to give somebody a interesting storyline that has politics sprinkled into there as part of the narrative. Would you agree, buddy?
Yes, I agree 100%, because look at for the past 40, 50, 60 years, every book that some of the books that comes out is very politically driven. Look at the spy novels during the Cold War. Western versus, we're talking about the Democratic Republic style mentality versus a communism. It's always been there. Look at James Bond. James Bond is very, very political, idealism throughout the book series itself. So for us to say, or some people can say, no, it does not. The writer's politics does not go into the books. Like it 100% does. Same thing for religion, same thing for idealism itself. So it's kind of interesting though, because when we had this conversation, we normally have this type of conversation every time we look for books to read, and majority of the books out there are very one-sided, right? As soon as you provide an opinion or a contradiction to the social norm, that book becomes very quote unquote political, right? So it's depending on where we are right now socially, that can go either way, because this kind of quote unquote political books or storylines or numerous faces, any story that an author writes down there's a line that the author can do when they're writing. They can cross that line, or they can stay below that line. That line is considered social norm.
You say social norm, but in this day and age, in these politics and so forth, what is a social norm?
Yeah,
right?
that's what we're gonna define that for you. That social norm is depending who's in power. Right. So if you have a government that's very censorship based against their political idealism, as soon as you write something that goes against that, you'll get quote unquote censored, right? Or they're gonna go after you. But if you write a book that praises the current government, they're gonna say everyone should read this, right? Then right. So it comes to the point now too, Derek, that we always have this conversation. I think we have this conversation 3 times a year regarding censorship, because one of the biggest thing that actually proposed, I'm not sure if you remember this, I was proposing, hey, we should read something in the book banned list. Remember that conversation we had? And that conversation
Yeah.
became like, oh, shall we do it? Shall we not do it?
I
Right?
mean, when we have a book ban list, I mean, it's interesting that in this day and age, regardless of what country it is, we are seeing that sort of mentality come back to ban stuff. And I mean, governments do this. When governments become involved in doing it, there's no way to argue that it isn't political rhetoric at that point to do it. Now, regardless of whether it's a government, a state, whatever that might be doing this, it's between censorship and the narrative that they want to get out. Now, I don't have a problem in somebody writing about a sensitive topic if it's part of a larger narrative, as long as that narrative is not the focus of the storyline. If it's there as a mechanism to move forward, okay, great. But when we get people that are one side or the other to a political party, and they say, well, you've included that narrative in your book and thus it must be banned or excluded because of this political rhetoric. Is that going too far when the person hasn't even intended to make a political statement?
This is now the question you have to ask yourself is this, though. Based on your example, who makes that decision? Who makes a decision? We're going to ban you because your political opinion or political statement it goes against who we are. Usually, the people who says that are the people in power. So, depending on who's in power, can determine what a writer what is considered acceptable. Right. So this is when, in my personal opinion, that if you're going to talk about some type of politics or idealism on your books, you may or may not be banned. There's a fine line that you're going to go against. So in other words, if you go against society's norm or current society idealism based on your government, you may or may not get banned. But if you want to take political points and say, yeah, look at me, I'm writing, and look at me, I'm being showered by the leadership of the country, and say, yeah, you should read this book. This means you, as a writer, bent over and said, what do you want me to write? Then I'll write it the way that you want me to write. Right? But as soon as a writer says go against that government idealism, that becomes a very, very fine line of like political interference now.
Then you're just a propaganda piece for the government.
Exactly.
If you're writing what the government wants. So, when we talk about politics in books and when we're discussing what that looks like, the interference piece is part of it. But the other aspect is what the individual feels about that piece. Like if the government comes to you and says, hey, write this for me. Well, obviously that's propaganda. What I'm sort of trying to get to you about is somebody that wants to make a political statement in a book, or the person that simply wants to write a book with political undertones that doesn't have an interest in the statement. And what is the line between those two?
The line's still the same, in my opinion.
You think it's still the same?
It's the same because
because even if a person is not intending to make a political statement, they're making it by simply writing about the political party or whatever that might be. Is that what you're saying?
Let's
apolitical stuff.
Yeah. Remember, any political style writing. It's remember, democracy is just an idealism. Communism is an idealism. Marxism is an idealism. It's an idea, right? Remember, Canada is a republic. As soon as you establish a rule on your country, theoretically you're a republic. If you want to keep saying you're a democratic country, that means if you want pure democratic rule country, every person has a vote. So you just keep that in mind when I say this, though. If you're writing a book and say, yes, I am writing a book based on what is pure democracy, quote unquote, in my fictional world, right? Now you're establishing an idea. But if you if you're a writer based in a country that quote unquote somewhat practices it, and that book starts spreading, and the political government decides to say, hey, no, I want this book to be banned because I don't want to spread this type of idea in the population. Now we're on the verge of now that's censorship, and now as a political government is telling the people, don't read this book because it's establishing something. So now you're going against the government.
Now
right?
what the point I was trying to get to was where do we lessen the talk of free speech, and when does that, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with somebody's statement, at what point does free speech become controlled by the government or a government, whatever that is?
Free speech is just an idea. It's not a right. Some countries don't have free speech. Some countries,
I completely agree with you.
Some
countries are like, if you do this, we're going to put you in jail. Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, that's totally a thing,
But here's the thing. Some countries do have free speech, but there is a rules in that free speech. Canada has that. Canada has free speech, but there's rules regarding what you can and cannot say in that free speech. Right? In the US, it's different as well, too. In the UK is different. Europe is different. Asia is different. Every single country has this free speech, but there's always a but, right? But if you have a country, or if you're writing a book, it's like the fundamental of the book is of free speech. I can say whatever I want, right? Now we're going back to that line of like, is this considered an idea, and a political idea that we should adopt, or what ifs? Now you're making the population read something that can go against the current government, right? So it doesn't matter what you do as a writer, something will come up while you're writing an idea or some type of like fictional propaganda. If that has that movement of keep going and going, this is a great idea. Now the government will be saying, okay, we don't like this because you're going against us now. So that becomes censorship, right? So if you're writing something that's considered political or even religious against a religious norm, that the political power can use that against you as an artist, right?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that when we're talking about free speech and so forth, and we're talking about let's just make this really bad. Okay, let's just make it really bad. Let's mix in religion along with that. Let's take in religion versus free speech and just mix those two together and say how this is going to get real bad. How those mix two together when people write about religion and they talk and they use free speech as the mechanism to do that, and how that impacts government policies and so forth in doing that. But as a reader, do you find that impactful? Like, will you seek out, when you and I talk about this, we don't generally want to have politics on the show. We don't want to engage in that because everybody has their opinion and we don't have any issue with anyone having an opinion, but people become very staunch in their positions. And if we push on a specific button or something like that, somebody might take issue, and then it becomes a thing, which you and I want to avoid, generally speaking, right?
Generally speaking, yes. But with that comment, though, have you heard a saying called a religion and state should be separated?
Yeah, well, actually,
see, now my point
we're that's why I said it's a bad.
To be honest, in my opinion, it's not a bad thing, because if we're looking at the literature itself, straight literature, okay, we're not talking about politics. Well, theoretically, it's going to show up in politics no matter what. If you're ending up believing in something, in some type of religion, okay, I don't care what it is. If you write something about that religion that majority don't like, and the government's against it, same thing, you'll get censored out, or they'll consider it as a banned book, or consider it as a terrorist act, right? So for people keep saying that the government should, religion and government don't mix, of course they do. Of course they do. Right? So it's just one of those things too that, okay, if you end up writing a book about communism and about another type of religion that's not that's completely opposite of what the government's thinking of practicing, you'll be considered first of all a heretic, and the other one is anti-establishment automatically. So if you're a writer, if you're writing something that's something similar to that one, you have to make a decision. That person has to make a decision. Should I write something that's a great story to tell, or should I dumb it down so I won't get hate mail from the government? So, do you think that somebody's, depending on what mood the government is in, do you think somebody's book that they've written should be suppressed if the government feels that that's not in line with what they want in that time frame? Okay, here's a great example. It happened in Utah. Okay, Utah is heavy, very, very heavy Republican. They don't like things that it goes against the idealism of the government. Okay, the current government. I just want to say current government. They established a book ban, so you can't have LGBTQ content. It can't be.
Wait, is this just in the state? Is that specifically in that state, or I'm confused?
There's several states, but the Utah is the one that actually got blown up.
Utah is the one we're specifically talking about.
Yeah,
right?
But some states actually happened, but they learned their lesson not to do it again. They established you can't have LGBT, especially LGBT stuff. But surprisingly, Utah is actually very, 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 very pro LGBT. It's kind of weird. Utah is kind of weird like that. They can't have they can't establish race-based characters, for example. So what it is, like, anybody can submit a book to be considered to be banned, right? So a family, I can't remember who it was, but they ended up establishing, hey, you have to ban this book. It talks about LGBT rights. It talks about same-sex marriage. It talks about stuff, all that crazy things. And when they submitted it, the board actually approved the banning, and it's the Bible. And put it this way, everyone who established that book banning did not anticipate that at all. So now the Bible is banned in Utah because of their own rules.
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
It is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And giving the politician, if you try to weaponize literature and try to ban it, and you try to do a general, because if you try to hide it in a way that we're only banning things that we deem unacceptable. But who is the definition is unacceptable, right? Same thing for politics. If you write something that's against the government regime, who's the definition is considered acceptable?
Well, the weaponization part is actually a really good point you make. Yeah. Weaponizing any kind of documentation or whatever that goes out, book-wise. I mean, that's obviously the purpose to switch people's minds. And I mean, in the worst case scenarios, I mean, you can go even as far back as Hitler, and like Mein Kampf is like one of the worst sort of things, out there that really goes on about how he blames the Jews and so forth and all of that, and is the basis for everything that he did after. And it's sort of his justification for the actions that he took. And so it really is a weaponization of it. But here's another question for you. If somebody is weaponizing a topic, a idealism or an ideology, should we be worried about that literature is being used in that manner? And is it something that we should fight against from a writing perspective,
Oh yeah, we should definitely go against it because because of two things. One is, like, I'm not a big fan of censor. Here's a great example of this whole thing. Here's a great example. If you watch cable TV, right? Doesn't matter which country you go to. Well, majority of that is mostly in North America. And yeah, mostly in North America. If you watch cable TV, if you watch a movie, let's say whatever movie it is, you'll notice something immediately. They remove all the swearing, but you can blow a guy's head off. right? Why not do the opposite? What's more damaging, a person swearing or a person's head blowing up? So now we have to look at the underlying situation. Now it's like, okay, who agreed to this? Who made that person authority of saying you can't swear, but you're allowed to kill someone on TV in a show? Same thing in literature. It's books, and if you write something and it's considered banned, right? Who gives that person authority to say it's banned? You know what I mean? We're in a fine line right now. Right now, it's kind of interesting right now, Derek. There is some type of line that we can and cannot cross. If we do cross that line, your chances of being banned or censored is higher depending who's sitting on the chair.
Yeah, and I mean, even in Canada, people think of Canada as being this lovely, lovely place, but even here we have bills in front of our parliament that are looking to reduce our rights as citizens and monitor us and even do some crazy stuff here. And it's not really even talked about that much in Canada, but there's a lot of effort out there for censorship. And that censorship is for the power of the government to do and not for an individual to do, right? And censorship when it comes to books is usually the first place that governments go to censor things. And that usually comes down to ideology. And when ideology becomes part of the mechanism by which either a group of people or a government puts forth their will on others, then that's not really as much of a democracy anymore. No,
that's why that's why I'm a big fan of removing. I'm a strong believer that if you're going to be voting for a party, or even any politician, doesn't matter what party you're going to go vote for, the biggest thing that I look for when during election is what is their stance of the current situation happening in Canada, for example. What is your stance in LGBTQ rights? What is your stand in anti-gun? What is your right of freedom of religion? Do you support state versus? Do you support having religion on to help dictate policy? Especially the last one. If you have a party saying that no, we do not use religion as a bedrock of our political idealism, I like that. But if you use religion as your bedrock of your policy, then I have an issue, because that party would literally use religion to establish rules, and majority of the time, people who do not follow that religion will be shit out of luck. Same thing in books. If you read a book, right, or you wrote a book that goes against the current government, you may not be getting paid for the next 4 to 5 years until that gets reversed. So it is very, very hard to say political writing may or may not garnish you a bestseller. It may even get you in trouble, right? And if you get a chance, watch V for Vendetta. That's a great example of censorship. Watch 1985. That's a great movie to talk about censorship.
1984, buddy.
1984, sorry. 85 is something else. 84. Thank you. You know what I mean? Do you agree with my statement?
I agree. I agree, buddy. I think that you make a very valid point there. And I think the actual interesting about mentioning V for Vendetta is a really great movie to express how he puts it in the movie. He's like, I don't blame you. You just kind of, you went along with it. I'm not mad at you for it. You just kind of went along with it. It's that idea of if somebody I lost my train of thought, buddy. I totally lost my train of thought.
Oh man, I was looking forward to think about it. Hurry. I really want to know what you think about that, because we're in interesting times now. In my opinion, very interesting time, because there's a lot of literature coming out now, especially there's a lot of self-published books out there that I'm seeing, because I think I mentioned this to you several times. Every time I travel, I don't go to. When I go travel, the first thing I normally do is my wife and I go to independent bookstores, right? And we look at independent writers and see what they're writing about, because it's a great way to establish what is politically and morally happening in that country. Because there's a lot of things happening in the world right now, and it's getting very interesting. And unfortunately, some of the best writers out there are being muzzled, and that's tragic in my opinion.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share a review. We love to hear from you. Send us an email at yourbookmarksinfo@gmail.com. Join us again right here where you left off.